Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle. This is the podcast where we take a look at just the first episode of a series, the pilot, and use it to decide if we should watch the entire series, or at least the second episode. Why, you wonder? Well, because there's just so little time and so much to bloody watch. Today, we are taking a look at the pilot episode of Sky Atlantic's Mary and George. Now, if you don't know the deal, then when analysing a pilot, I typically look at the story, the characters, those are the protagonists and the antagonists, as well as taking a look at the pace, the serial arc, where I like to do a bit of wild speculation as to where I think things may progress. I then take a look at the end of episode hook before letting you know if I think the pilot episode has done its job and why, or why not. Okay, let's get rolling with the pilot synopsis as provided by Sky. To change her family's fortunes, Mary Villiers convinces her son George to take action. Julianne Moore stars. I would say that's a relatively vague synopsis. It doesn't quite grip you and it doesn't quite let you know what you're walking into. Honestly, it feels more like a tweet. But hey ho, luckily there are other ways to convince an audience to watch a series. Okay, before we actually start talking about the pilot episode itself, let's dive into the credits. And I always start with the credits because I think the behind the scenes stuff is just as important as what happens in front of the camera. The pilot title is The Second Son, and we have an episode length of about 55 minutes, which sits perfectly for me. We also have a series length of 7 episodes. I don't know if this is just me, but anytime I have odd numbered episode lengths, I always think that they've either gone over by 1 episode or under by 1 episode. I don't know. For all I know, 7 episodes is the perfect amount. So the pilot episode, The Second Son, was written by the series creator, D.C. Moore, who has also written an episode of Coming Up, Killing Eve, and Temple, as well as 6 episodes of the miniseries Not Safe for Work, which saw them nominated for a number of awards in 2015/16. The Second Son was directed by Oliver Hermanus, and I'm not familiar with any of their work, but their directorial credits include Shirley Adams, Beauty, The Endless River, Moffy, and Living. Moving on to cast, where things get a little bit more interesting, no offense. First, we have Julianne Moore, who plays Mary Villiers. And you know what? Julianne Moore is one of those names that I know, but I'm not sure I've watched a lot of what she's been in. Moore has starred in the likes of Jurassic Park, The Lost World, The Big Lebowski, Boogie Nights, Children of Men, Next, Crazy Stupid Love, Still Alice, Seventh Son, Kingsman, The Golden Circle, Dear Evan Hansen, and most recently, May December. Now, according to her IMDb page, Julianne Moore has been nominated for 200 awards. Talk about a pioneer. Next, we have Nicholas Galitzine, who plays George Villiers, and he has starred in the likes of The Craft Legacy, Purple Hearts, Bottoms, and Red, White, and Royal Blue. Mary and George will actually be my first time seeing him in anything. I know, Bottoms and Red, White, and Royal Blue are on the never-ending list. I'll get there. Next, from the selected cast list, we have Tony Curran, who plays King James I. And honestly, I'm surprised his filmography is so long because I've only really known him for playing Vincent van Gogh in one of my favourite Doctor Who episodes, Vincent and the Doctor. However, Curran has also starred in Pearl Harbor, Blade 2, Miami Vice, 24, The Mentalist, Sons of Anarchy, Elementary, Roots, Outlaw King, SEAL Team, The Flash, which I really do not remember and I used to be a hardcore fan, as well as The Secret Invasion before he starred in Mary and George. Tony Curran will also be starring in the upcoming series Outlander Blood of My Blood, which is interesting. I never finished Outlander. I do intend to, but I got bored at some stage when someone went back again. I don't want to spoil it for you, but now that I know it's over, I will eventually go back and finish Outlander, but I digress. Finally, on the selected cast list, we have Laurie Davidson, who plays Robert Carr, 1st Earl of Somerset. And Davidson has starred in the series Will, had a role in the 2019 flop Cats, and has also starred in the series Eyes, Guilty Party, and The Sandman. He also starred in The Last Kingdom, Seven Kings Must Die, which is where I recognise his punk ass face from. And if you can't tell by my reaction, he played the villain in what was The Last Kingdom movie wrap-up. And finally, to say about Davidson is that he also was in an episode of Apple TV Plus's miniseries Masters of the Air. Ooh, also, he's going to be playing Dylan in the upcoming TV adaptation of Beth O'Leary's novel The Road Trip. That was a question mark on her name, not not on the series of which the novel is based. So The Road Trip, which is funnily enough my current audiobook, though I've only listened to the first chapter, so no comments can be made yet as to whether or not I am looking forward to said adaptation. Mary and George can be watched on Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on Sky Atlantic for the next 7 weeks, or if you have the Sky Demand services, then all episodes are available for you to binge right now. And finally, to note in the credits section is that the series is inspired by Benjamin Woolley's non-fiction book titled The King's Assassin, which is now giving me all kinds of hints as to where the series could be going. I don't know. So yes, Mary and George is to some degree at least based on a true story. So, get your fingers ready for what looks like some insane fact checking if you commit to the series. But of course, we are pilot people. So let's move on to talking about what made me want to watch the pilot in the first place. First and foremost was the fact that I was basically just hit over the head with trailers since December, November even? Mary and George. You couldn't turn on a Sky channel without seeing a teaser for Mary and George. And you know what? The teaser did its job, because here I am on the day of its release watching it. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Can't go wrong with that marketing plan. Also for me, I feel like Sky Atlantic is the new Sunday 9 p.m. BBC One. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to lie, BBC One 9 p.m. Sunday night dramas have been flopping me recently. Just every time I think I'm going to like it, I don't. Boat Story for prime example. But I've always found that Sky channels are more likely to take risks, do something a little bit risky, something a little bit more interesting with their programming. And so that is something I am expecting from Mary and George. It does look different to the typical British period drama. Also, it looks so scandalous. I mean, the fact it's inspired by a true story is wild. And personally, I am ready for my jaw to drop. I want my jaw to hit the floor. I want to break my jaw watching Mary and George. But enough on that. Let's move on to talking about the first 10 minutes of the pilot episode, The Second Son. Why the first 10 minutes, you wonder? Well, I was always taught that those first 10 pages of a script need to be top-notch to pull in a reader and subsequently a watcher. And in fact, to prove my point, recently the BAFTA Rowcliffe competition has opened, and part of the submission process requires you to submit a 10-page extract from your script. Only. They also do want some subsidiary pieces of information, but from the script, they just want 10 pages, and I already have problems with that as it is. But my point is, 10 minutes, 10 pages are important. There's another competition that is asking for the first 20 pages of your pilot script, which continues to show how pivotal those first 10 minutes of a pilot is. And now that I have lectured you to the point of boredom, let's talk about the first 10 minutes of The Second Son. So we start in 1592 and a baby is born and promptly dropped on the floor. However, he is soon scooped up and placed in his mother's arms. His mother is Mary, and she explains to him that he is the second son and that he will basically never inherit anything of human value and he is essentially useless. Yeesh. The midwife are asking if she wants to snip the umbilical, and she's like, no, leave me and my baby attached to each other. And then she names the baby George. We then flippity-flip forward to 1612, and on a walk in the woods, Mary finds George, now age 20, hanging from a tree, and she cuts him down. She's pretty much more fed up than surprised as he is spluttering back to life and simply says, "Good morning, George." And then we hit the opening. And I thoroughly enjoyed the opening. Think gruesome Renaissance style painting used to depict the brutal honesty of life, love, deception, and death in those days. Kind of vibes. Anyway, after that very engaging intro, we come back in and we hear that the reason that George tried, albeit not very hard, to kill himself is because he is in love with one of the servants and he doesn't want to go to France and learn to be a gentleman and be married off to a rich wife to finance his family's future, which his mother Mary is making him do. However, he claims his father never wanted that for him, and while his father draws breath, his father shall have the final say. As it turns out, his father Sir George, who is already sick/bedridden, is in fact now dead. So I guess it looks like he's doing exactly what his mother tells him to do. As the family bury Sir George on the grounds, we see a flashback of him with Mary, where he essentially is taunting her and belittling her. Mary does not just sit there and take it, she fights back with wit and grit, which basically ends with the two of them both tumbling down the stairs. Mary is fine, Sir George, not so much. When one of the housemaids comes to help Sir George, Mary stops her and they both watch him whimpering as blood pools out of his head. And that is the first 10 minutes of The Second Son. Now, I think as an intro, we get a fantastic understanding of the dynamic of Mary and George's relationship. We get a taste of what Mary wants, i.e. to make her son great, both for himself and for herself, who didn't get a choice in her lot in life, which is basically classic parental projected expectations to share with a therapist. Anyway, we also do learn about George and the fact that he is considered universally attractive. He's a smidge spoilt, and as much as he protests, he is in fact a spineless mama's boy. And that is at least for those first 10 minutes. If you haven't guessed from the title, this is pretty much the Mary and George show. So let's talk about main characters. And you guessed it. We're going to start off with Mary Villiers, and we learn in the first episode that Mary was a serving girl whose birthright was fudged so that Sir George Villiers, Knight of the Shire, could marry her. We also get the sense from the pilot episode that Mary is ambitious and she wants to prove people wrong, and George is her tool to help her do that. And though I use the term tool, I think it's important to state that she does love her second son above all the rest of her children, which she herself makes very, very clear in the pilot episode. Mary is a woman who goes out and gets what she wants. She takes what she wants and she can see steps ahead. She's playing the long game after being stifled for so long, being married to Sir George. Now that he's dead, it's her time to shine, and she will be using her son George as polish. What I also think is quite interesting about Mary is that we aren't told her name until around the halfway mark, and that's really interesting. I mean, it kind of shows that she isn't considered, that she is backburnered and sidelined, and she is even the one to introduce herself. She's having a conversation with someone and she knows them by name. She plans to make him her new husband. But as they're having a conversation, he never asks who she is. And partway through their conversation or negotiation, she says, "I'm Mary, by the way." And there was just something about that. And it really just goes to emphasize some of the points I've already made about her, that she knows how to stand up for herself. She's willing to go out and take what it is that she needs and claim what she thinks is hers. Moving on to our second main character, George. Firstly, to say about George is that he's a wuss. He's a big fat wuss, which isn't really his fault in a sense. Apparently his father, Sir George, used to beat him daily, and George Jr. just stood there and took it. And his mother does in fact dote on him, even though she wants more from him. She loves him. She's kind to him. He is hers, and in a sense, she is his. Does that make sense? We also learn about George in this pilot episode that he struggles with his sexuality. Though he enjoys the company and sleeping with women, he also has eyes for men, and that comes out throughout the episode. George does in fact go to France at his mother's request, where he learns to be a gentleman. And while he is there, we do see a change in him. But I think what one will always remember about George is no matter how he came out on the other side, we know how he went in, and that was as someone who was essentially spineless. Over the course of the pilot episode, we watch as George finds his power and his self-worth, both of which he gains while he is getting an education in not only being a gentleman, but exploration of his sexuality while he is in France. George is ultimately his mother's son, and so though at the beginning we see him being a bit of a wuss, by the end of the episode we can quite clearly see the similarities between the two of them. In terms of Mary and George, they are a team. They are the same in many ways. George was overlooked as the second son, and Mary was overlooked simply because she is a woman. However, the sameness in the two of them could eventually cause a butting of heads, especially now that George is coming into his own as a man. So yeah, I'm thinking that even though in the pilot episode Mary is pulling the strings, George has grown while he's been in France. He gets a taste of court, and I think the puppet may at some point become the puppet master. Now, in terms of an antagonist, thus far, I would say Robert Carr, 1st Earl of Somerset. He is the king's lover and he fears someone younger, someone more interesting, someone new coming to take his place, not just in the king's bed, but also whispering in the king's ear and directing matters of state and court. From the variety of court-based period dramas that I've seen, having the ear of the king or queen is an intoxicating power that people would kill for. So yes, I do think Robert Carr, 1st Earl of Somerset, is dangerous, especially when we see the king acknowledging George and humiliating Carr in the process within the pilot episode. And now it's time to take a quick interlude to see what TV and film life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. Starting, of course, with books, and March is a romance reading month for me, and I have 8 hopefuls, 9? 8 hopefuls to get through in March. I have already read 7 Days in June by Tia Williams, and this was a enjoyable read. I liked the 2 main characters, Eva and Shane. It was a second chance romance. I will say that the book did feel like it was trying to do too much. There were like 3 main storylines in there. It felt like I was reading 3 books or 2.5 books. And it did get a little bit messy in places. Certain themes overlapped that didn't quite fit together. It was just trying to do too much. But I did enjoy it for the most part. I think I rated it a 3 out of 5 on the Goodreads. I have also started the 7th Bridgerton book. I cannot remember what it's called, but this is Hyacinth's story, and she's the youngest of the Bridgerton 8. And I've just been reading these Bridgerton books for years, even before the series started, so I just need to wrap this up. So there's one more book to read after Hyacinth's book, so I don't think I'll get to it in March, but definitely some point in this year. Now, as I did mention earlier, I have listened to the first chapter of Beth O'Leary's The Road Trip, and I liked the flat share, so here's hoping that it won't disappoint. I can't give much more comment on it thus far. I think the 2 main characters have met each other or re-met each other. This one is also giving second chance romance. Okay, moving over to television, and I have finished watching the live action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, I will say that I did tear up in a few places. Now, I will say I do think that was partly to do with the music, at least in some of the cases. And I mentioned this in the pilot review I did, that the music that is used in the live action adaptation, some of it is taken from the music in the animated series. So I am already having certain emotional connections with the music. So let's just say Brave Soldier Boy played and I wept. However, outside of those moments, I will say that the series as a whole, as a fan of the OG series, and as a person who says the animated original series is one of their favorite television programs of all time, I will say that the live action adaptation was a disappointment. I don't want to go into a rant and rave about it, so if you want to chat about it, you know where to find me. Next on the TV list is Trigger Point Series 2, which I binged over the course of like 2 days. And I will say it wasn't as good as Series 1, but they did manage to keep up the intensity and the stakes and the drama. So that was done really well. I just think I wasn't as invested in the motivations of the bad guys. They were just a bunch of losers, to be honest, out here talking about how they need to deconstruct the system. It was a bit weak. There was a bunch of millennials who wanted to deconstruct the system by blowing things up. And it was like, but really, what is it that you want to do? Who were they? What was their real motive? What was their real purpose? I think that was really weak. But I will say that the main character, whose name I do not remember, had a really good progressive narrative from the events that happened in Series 1. So that was good to see. Finally, to note on the television side of things is that I have, for the time being at least, tabled The Boys and Vox Machina. I just really wasn't engaged in either of the 2 programs, so who knows, I might come back. There might be a bored weekend and I'll be like, what should I watch? And then I will binge the rest of Series 2 of The Boys. I think I got like 2 episodes in, so we shall see. But for now, bye-bye. And finally, moving on to film, I rewatched Dune, which was a lot of fun. It was so enjoyable the second time around. I've only seen the movie once in cinema when it came out in 2019, I want to say. And at that point, I gave it a 3.5. But on the rewatch, I upped my rating to 4.5. Maybe it was because I was able to pause and reflect and actually take in the world building as opposed to just having everything coming at me really quickly and not being able to pause or have subtitles in the cinema. So yeah, no, that was really, really fun. And I, of course, rewatched it so that I could then go and see Dune 2, which I rated 4 out of 5. And it was really good. There's no doubt about that. I'm trying to be less stingy with my rating systems this year. But for me, it was all the prophecy mumbo jumbo that really didn't have anything to back it up. It just felt a bit contrived. Something would happen and it was like, the prophecy foretold this. And yes, some of that was used for humor. I did understand and see that. But we were just sort of fed the information as it came, and it would have been nice to be able to work things out for ourselves as opposed to just watching things happen. It was quite passive. That's the word I'm looking for. I think Dune 2 was quite passive, whereas we could piece together certain things from the first one. The second one, things were just coming at us and we just had to take it. I will say though that I did love the Colosseum scene. Austin Butler was fantastic, and that whole sandworm riding malarkey, that shit cray. And if you want to talk about any other crazy shit, then follow at Pilot Principle on Instagram and Twitter/X, where we can chat about the latest in film and TV and books. In terms of what I really liked about the pilot episode of Mary and George, the second son, Mary Villiers comes out with the line, "If I were a man and I looked like you, I'd rule the fucking planet." And do you know what? Bars. Absolute bars. Can I get that on a t-shirt? Or a fridge magnet or something? It was a great character summarization for Mary. It was a great tone summarization for the series. And you know what? Same, hun. You know, minus the part about being a man. Quite happy being a female over here. But 1600s, am I right? And just a quick follow-up on tone. I thought the tone for the pilot episode was brilliant. It was hilarious. It gave the episode an odd sense of modernity to it that made it feel quite refreshing. There was none of that thee, thou, thou. It was all straight talking, and there's something about that that really grounded it and made it feel a lot more real. Now, on the flippity flip side, in terms of what I didn't like so much, I will say that I didn't quite fully understand the family dynamics within the Villiers. So we've got the firstborn son, John. We have George, the second son. Then there's a girl and a boy. Now, John is described by his father as soft, and he seems mentally and physically inferior to George, but no one really comes out and says why that is or what they do or don't expect from John, which again was quite odd because he is the family heir. I mean, despite being cut off in their father's will, all of them. He is the heir, so what are his expectations? And if he doesn't have any expectations, why not? I mean, there is a very brief moment in the pilot episode where they say the whole reason that George has to go away and become a gentleman is to help with the family. But why is that the second son's responsibility? That sounds like first son business, you know? I will say, though, that even though the siblings felt like weird hovering extras, I will give them credit for having a believable sibling dynamic sort of just operating in the background. Now, before we get to that all-important questions, let's refresh ourselves with the pilot synopsis. To change her family's fortunes, Mary Villiers convinces her son George to take action. Julianne Moore stars. So firstly to say is I thought the writing was great. Like I said, that touch of modernity to the dialogue really elevated the script. It solidified its tone. It set it apart from other period dramas that take place within that same time period. The setting, I think, was so, and that's especially when it came to France, because what was he in France? Like, honestly, like, what was he in France? It really looks like that they pulled up a boat at Dover or wherever some pebbly beach is, and then they just went to some really old house in the UK. It was giving budget cuts. It was giving budget cuts. So I will say that I didn't like that aspect of the setting. Otherwise, you know, country homes are country homes. England is England, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, the France element of it, they could have made it a little bit more Parisian. In terms of pace, I think those first 10 minutes were great. It did flag a bit in the middle when George goes to France and is just playing around in an empty house. but it does pick up again. So the pace wasn't fantastic, but I was engaged for the majority of the pilot episode. In terms of the serial arc, I can clearly see that it is Mary's agenda to have her son George replace Car and get into the king's bed and become his favourite and sort of spread wealth to the family from there. I think that was crystal clear. The B story is relatively unclear at this point, but hey, I mean, Mary is a mother. I've recently reread Pride and Prejudice. I mean, I think it's still a thing that she'll probably want to try and marry off all her kids. So maybe that will factor into the B plot somehow. I don't know. Wild speculation over here. And finally, with the end of episode hook, I will say that the game is afoot to make George King James's new lover and therefore elevate his status and therefore Mary's status as well. And just the next step is to find a way to get George back in King James's sights, because they have a brief moment towards the end of the pilot episode. But yes, how will they be able to cross paths again now that the plan is the plan and that George is on board with said plan? And now there's only one more question left to ask. Will I be continuing with Mary and George? Pause for dramatic effect. Of course. It was such an enjoyable watch. I feel like I am part of the game. I feel like I am plotting and planning to set up George with the king. I want Mary to succeed in all her endeavours. Not to mention that this is bound to get messy. Messy with a capital M. And I want a front row seat to that drama. And the final reason that I want to continue with the series is that I think the relationship between Mary and George is really interesting, and I want to see how that progresses. We don't often get a mother and son relationship, especially ones that feel good close. They feel like they're friends. You know, she clearly loves him immensely, but she's also willing to use him to get what she needs to get done. But I'm also not mad at her for that, you know? So yes, I want to see how that progresses. If by the end of episode 7, they'll still be on the best of terms, or if things have completely gone awry. But that is, of course, just me. So if you prefer your period dramas a little bit more authentic, you like a thee, a thou, a though, then Mary and George might not be for you. If you prefer your period dramas specifically set within court and focusing on the recent king or queen so you can get a bit of history into their lives, then again, this one will not be for you. And finally, if you are looking for something a little bit more PG that you can watch with the family, then please do not at all go anywhere near Mary and George. Right, okay, the final thing from me is to give the pilot episode, The Second Son, a pilot score. And for me, this would be a 4 out of 5. Come through with the high scores of late, right? For me, the pilot episode was a really good setup to where the series could be going, as well as a good setup for the main characters, Mary and George. We also do get teased a little bit of King James to get an idea of his characteristics and his personalities. And again, all of this was shoved into 55 minutes or less. Fantastic. I also think that the pilot episode is really focused. You know, it's really about Mary trying to elevate her family's status through George. Full stop. There is no time to think about anything else. If there were any secondary elements, they made sure to move through them really quickly so we got the gist and we could continue on with the main plot point. A key example of this is that after Sir George dies, Mary is told that the soonest she can marry is in 2 weeks' time. And then we get text on screen that says 2 weeks later and she's cozying up to who is going to be her next husband. Bish bash bosh, you know, she's focused, we're focused. I love it. I also think that the character studies are subtle yet effective in helping us to see the future of the characters' lives. I do think that the pilot episode does stand out from the genre, especially in the sense that the narrative isn't specifically dealing with ruling and warring monarchs. So it's great to see those external strings being pulled, and being pulled by a woman. Now that we've hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode, The Second Son, a watch? Or will you be rushing to binge every episode of Mary and George? Follow and chat to me over on Threads, Instagram and Twitter /X @PilotPrinciple, and I will catch you on the next episode.